The day of my daughter's wedding began with an air of magic, the kind of atmosphere you only feel once or twice in a lifetime, when everything around you seems touched by something greater than ordinary life. The house was alive with movement long before the sun even rose. Relatives bustled through the halls, voices overlapped in a melody of laughter, instructions, and occasional arguments about the smallest details that seemed, in that moment, to carry the weight of the world. The scent of fresh flowers lingered in the air, their petals carefully chosen to match the theme my daughter had dreamt of since she was a little girl. Every ribbon, every decoration, every shining detail was a reflection of her vision, and watching it come together filled me with a quiet pride that swelled inside my chest. I could hear the soft hum of my daughter's laughter coming from her room, muffled behind a door where bridesmaids worked tirelessly to perfect every detail of her look. It was the same laugh that had once filled our home when she was a child, chasing after bubbles in the backyard, unbothered by the world and its weight. That laugh, though older and more polished, carried me back to a time when my greatest joy was simply watching her grow. On this day, as she prepared to become someone's wife, I realized that I was watching the culmination of years of sacrifice, love, and countless sleepless nights. The guests began to arrive in streams, their footsteps echoing down the hallway as they admired the decorations and exchanged greetings. Women in brightly colored dresses glided past, men in pressed suits adjusted their ties nervously, and children darted about, their giggles adding a playful note to the grandeur of the occasion. It was everything I had imagined her wedding would be: alive, filled with family, friends, and the kind of joy that no photograph could ever truly capture. My heart swelled with pride as I thought about how far we had come, about how this day was not just a celebration of my daughter's love, but also a reflection of the life I had worked so hard to build for her. As I moved among the guests, greeting familiar faces and offering polite smiles to those I barely knew, I felt a wave of belonging that was rare for me. Weddings have a way of drawing together people from every corner of one's life: old friends, distant relatives, even acquaintances who hadn't been seen in years. It was as though the entire fabric of our existence had been stitched together into one grand tapestry, and today it was being displayed in its full brilliance. I listened to stories about my daughter, anecdotes shared by relatives who remembered her as a child, tales of her kindness, her stubbornness, her resilience. Each word filled me with a mixture of pride and nostalgia, as though I were standing not only in the present, but in every version of the past that had led us here. When I finally saw her step out of her room, dressed in white, I felt time stop. There she was, my little girl, transformed into a bride. Her dress shimmered under the lights, every detail of lace and fabric arranged as though it had been woven just for her. Her hair cascaded down in soft waves, adorned with delicate flowers that seemed to glow as she moved. For a moment, I forgot everything else. She was radiant, and the sight of her took the breath out of me. My mind replayed images of her as a child. The ceremony itself was like something from a dream. The music began softly, filling the space with a melody that tugged at the heart. Guests rose to their feet as she walked down the aisle, her arm linked with mine, her grip strong yet trembling. I could feel her heartbeat racing through her hand, and I whispered words of reassurance, though I was not sure if they were more for her or for myself. Every step felt like a journey through time, a farewell to the years when she belonged wholly to me, and a surrender to the reality that she now belonged partly to someone else. The eyes of the crowd were fixed on her, but my gaze never wavered from her face, drinking in every detail of the moment, knowing it would be etched into my memory forever. As she reached the altar, the room seemed to glow brighter, as though the universe itself had leaned closer to witness her happiness. The vows began, each word filled with promises, with hope, with a belief in a future unshaken by hardship. The sound of her voice as she spoke her vows was steady, filled with conviction, and I could see the strength in her eyes, the same strength she had carried since childhood. She was no longer just my daughter. She was a woman, ready to build a life of her own. And yet, even as the ceremony unfolded with perfection, I could not stop myself from remembering the countless nights I had held her hand through fear, through doubt, through heartbreak. All of those moments had prepared her for this day, and though it tore at me to let go, I knew she was ready. The reception followed in a burst of color and sound. Music pulsed through the room, laughter rose above the clinking of glasses, and the dance floor filled with relatives moving to the rhythm of celebration. Toasts were made, each one laced with stories of love, resilience, and the promise of a future brighter than the past. I watched her from across the room, her smile radiant, her laughter unguarded. She looked happy in a way I had not seen in years, as though every burden had been lifted and replaced with joy. People approached me one by one, offering congratulations, complimenting the beauty of the ceremony, admiring the strength of the bond between mother and daughter. And though I smiled and accepted their words, my heart was elsewhere, wrapped around the sight of her dancing, glowing, living in this moment of pure happiness. Every corner of the celebration held memories. The flowers reminded me of the garden she once played in. The cake, tall and elegant, reminded me of the birthdays where she would insist on licking the frosting before anyone else could cut into it. The sight of her friends laughing at a table reminded me of the times I would hear their voices echoing through our home during sleepovers, filling the house with youthful joy. Everywhere I looked, pieces of her childhood seemed to whisper to me, layered beneath the grandeur of the wedding, reminding me that this day was not just about love, it was about time, about growth, about the passage from one life into another. And through it all, a deep pride rooted itself in me, heavier than any fear or doubt. I had done my part. I had raised her, guided her, protected her, and now I was watching her step into the world with a strength I knew would carry her through whatever came next. The joy of the wedding was not just hers, it was mine too, a reflection of years of love that had built the foundation for this moment. The celebration carried on with an energy so vibrant that it seemed to wrap every goose. As I moved through the reception hall, the clinking of glasses and bursts of applause followed me, yet every sound seemed to fade when I caught sight of one particular exchange across the room. My daughter was locked in conversation with someone who appeared oddly tense, their posture stiff, their words measured, and though her smile never faltered, her eyes betrayed something else, hesitation, discomfort, perhaps even a trace of fear. It was a fleeting moment, gone before I could place it, but it planted a seed in my mind that began to grow with every passing minute. I turned my attention elsewhere, forcing myself to join the laughter at a table filled with cousins who were reminiscing about childhood antics, but even as they spoke, my eyes wandered back to her. She was moving through the room with grace, thanking guests, accepting compliments, but there was a tightness in her gestures, a stiffness in the way she held herself that I could not ignore. This was her wedding day. She should have been glowing with unrestrained joy, and yet there was something restrained in her demeanor, as though she were carrying a weight that no one else could see. The whispers grew louder in my awareness. I caught fragments of hushed tones, names spoken quickly, words cut off when they realized I was near. A pair of relatives exchanged glances when I approached, their smiles stretched too wide, their eyes darting elsewhere as they made excuses to leave. The warmth of the celebration began to feel staged, like a play in which everyone was reciting lines, but behind the curtain, a different story was unfolding. Then it happened. I stumbled across a conversation I was never meant to hear. Standing near the hallway that led to the restrooms, I paused when I heard my daughter's name spoken in a voice sharp with urgency. Two voices overlapped in rapid exchange, their words hushed, but laced with a tension that made my chest tighten. I leaned closer, every muscle in my body straining to catch the fragments. "Does she know yet?" One voice whispered. "She can't find out here, it will ruin everything," the other responded. My pulse quickened. The air around me seemed heavier, pressing down as though the walls themselves were complicit in keeping the secret. I wanted to step forward, to demand answers, but my feet remained rooted, my body frozen between disbelief and dread. They spoke again, their words sharp, trembling with the weight of something monumental. "If she finds out today, the whole marriage will collapse." The words sliced through me like glass. I stumbled backward, the sound of laughter from the reception colliding with the chaos in my mind. A secret. Something powerful enough to destroy the very foundation of this wedding, powerful enough to unravel everything my daughter believed about her future. I returned to the reception hall in a haze, my eyes scanning the room as though the truth might reveal itself in someone's expression, in some hidden gesture. Suddenly, every detail seemed suspect: the nervous way certain relatives avoided my gaze, the forced laughter that didn't quite reach the eyes, the way the groom himself seemed distracted, his attention flickering too often toward one corner of the room where a woman I barely recognized sat in silence, her eyes fixed on him with an intensity that sent chills down my spine. The music swelled, guests cheered as another toast began, but I was no longer part of the celebration. I watched my daughter's face, searching for cracks in the mask she wore. She smiled at the right moments, raised her glass, leaned into her husband when the crowd's eyes were upon them, but when she thought no one was watching, her expression faltered. A shadow crossed her face, fleeting but undeniable. She knew. Perhaps not the full truth, but some part of it weighed heavily on her, threatening to pull her under even as she struggled to keep herself afloat. I tried to convince myself that I was mistaken, that the whispers were nothing, that the looks exchanged across the room were the product of my overactive mind, but the knot in my stomach only tightened. I remembered the tone of those voices in the hallway, the urgency, the fear. Secrets have a way of bleeding into the open, no matter how tightly they are bound, and I could feel. The air in the wedding hall was still heavy with laughter and music when the revelation unfolded before me like a shadow creeping across the brightest light. It was not loud, not dramatic, not the kind of secret that explodes in a moment of chaos. Instead, it was quiet, whispered first in hushed tones that were never meant for my ears, but found their way to me nonetheless. I caught fragments of conversation, the kind that slips through the noise when you are not even trying to listen. The words seemed harmless at first, stray syllables floating in the air, until they began to form into a truth that struck deeper than any blade. It was betrayal, not from a stranger or a distant acquaintance, but from someone I trusted, someone who stood close to my daughter and to me. At first, I could not believe it. My mind rejected the possibility outright, dismissing the idea as gossip born from envy. But the more I listened, the clearer it became that this was not speculation, not rumor, but fact. My chest tightened, my hands trembled against the fabric of my dress, and the hall around me seemed to blur, as though I had been pulled underwater. The music, the laughter, the clinking of glasses, they all faded into a dull hum while those words repeated in my mind like a haunting refrain. I turned my gaze toward the faces around me, scanning each expression for a sign of guilt, for a flicker of recognition that might reveal the truth. My eyes fell on familiar people, relatives I had known my whole life, friends I had welcomed into my home, and even the man who was now to become part of our family through my daughter. And it was there, in the smallest of gestures, the sidelong glance, the nervous smile, that I began to piece together the reality I wished I could ignore. It was not just a betrayal of trust, it was a deliberate act, hidden behind years of lies, masked by affection, cloaked in the pretense of loyalty. The weight of it crushed me. I remembered the countless moments of trust one had placed in this person, the times I had shared my fears and my hopes, never once suspecting that they could hold such darkness behind their eyes. Betrayal, I realized, is not born in an instant. It grows in silence, nurtured by secrecy, feeding on the blind faith of those who believe in love and loyalty. And here, at the very heart of a day meant to celebrate union and purity, that betrayal had chosen to reveal itself in the cruelest of ways. I tried to study my breathing, tried to convince myself that perhaps I was misunderstanding, that perhaps my mind was weaving illusions out of stray words. But then I saw the evidence in gestures too small for anyone else to notice, fingers brushing when they should not have, glances exchanged with meanings too heavy to be innocent. The truth stood before me, undeniable, etched into the space between those who thought they had hidden it so well. The betrayal was not faceless. It belonged to someone I had loved deeply, someone who was supposed to stand beside me as family, someone whose role in our lives had always been built on trust. To see them entwined in this web of deception was a wound far deeper than anything a stranger could inflict. A stranger's betrayal may sting, but when it comes from someone who has walked beside, My mind flashed back through the years, small memories, overlooked signs, conversations that now seemed laced with double meanings. I wondered how I had been so blind, how I had missed the warnings that must have been there all along. Betrayal does not appear fully formed. It creeps in slowly, testing boundaries, taking root in places where trust is too strong to question. Perhaps I had been too eager to believe in goodness, too willing to place faith where it was not deserved. And yet, even as the truth carved its place in my heart, I kept silent. My daughter's laughter still echoed across the hall, her smile untouched by the storm that had begun to rage within me. I could not bear to shatter her moment of joy with the weight of what I now knew. Every instinct screamed at me to confront it, to demand answers, to strip away the mask of deceit that had been worn so confidently. But I remained still, watching, gathering the pieces of this truth as though each one might help me make sense of the devastation. The betrayal was not just personal, it was layered. It struck at me as a mother, as a woman, as someone who had built her life around the belief that loyalty was sacred. And now, here it was unraveling, thread by thread, in the very place where loyalty was supposed to be celebrated in its purest form. I could not decide what hurt more, the act itself or the realization that it had been carried out so close to me, under my very nose, without my knowing. The faces of the guests blurred into the background as I watched the betrayer laugh, smile, and speak as though nothing were amiss. That was the cruelty of it, the ease with which they maintained the charade, the confidence with which they played their part in the celebration. I wanted to scream, to break the illusion, to point a finger and watch the facade crumble. But I swallowed the urge, letting it burn inside me, knowing that some truths demand the right moment to be revealed. As the celebration carried on, I felt a strange detachment settle over me. The music was still playing, the glasses were still being raised, the guests were still immersed in their joy. But for me, the world had tilted, cracked open by a secret that could never be undone. I knew now that nothing would ever be the same, that the trust one had carried like a shield had been shattered in an instant. Inside, my heart was torn between devastation and fury. I thought of the sacrifices I had made, the love I had given freely, the years I had dedicated to building a family bound by trust. To see it all tarnished by betrayal was to see my very identity questioned. Who was I, if not someone who could protect her family from such deceit? What kind of mother, what kind of woman, could stand blind while betrayal thrived within her walls? The hall seemed smaller, the air thicker, as I wrestled with the truth. Every glance, every movement of the betrayer felt like a taunt, as though they knew I had discovered their secret and yet believed I would remain silent. And perhaps they were right for now. For my daughter's sake, for the sanctity of her wedding day, I said nothing. But the knowledge burned inside me, sharper than any flame, deeper than any wound, and I knew it would not stay buried forever. The joy that had once filled the room began to feel like a fragile illusion, a thin veil stretched over something darker. I looked around, and while everyone else seemed carried away by the music, the food, and the laughter of a celebration, I could only see cracks forming in the walls of trust that had once held our family together. The smiles, the toasts, the shared dances all seemed hollow now, their brightness unable to reach me. I could hear my daughter's laughter echoing from the dance floor, see the light in her eyes as she embraced her new life, and yet in the shadow of that happiness stood the bitter knowledge that betrayal had wormed its way into our closest circle. Trust, once so solid, had shattered in silence, leaving pieces too sharp to touch without drawing blood. The betrayal did not belong to strangers outside our family. It was carved into the hearts of those closest to us. That was the part that cut the deepest. Betrayal from the outside world is something you can brace for, something you can guard against with suspicion or distance. But when it comes from within, from those who share your blood, your home, or your heart, it is a wound that does not stop bleeding. I could feel that wound opening wider with every passing moment, with every glance that confirmed what I now knew to be true. The wedding hall, once alive with joy, seemed to grow colder. I remembered how long I had trusted these people, how many years of shared meals, secrets, and memories we had exchanged. I thought of the times I had leaned on them in moments of weakness, believed their words, and held their hands as though nothing could ever break the bond we shared. And now, in the middle of my daughter's most sacred day, I realized those bonds had been nothing more than delicate threads, fragile enough to snap under the weight of lies. The betrayal was not just an act, it was a revelation of how easily love and trust could be turned into weapons. The smiles of those around me became. The broken trust reached into the very heart of motherhood itself. My daughter, radiant and full of joy, stood at the center of it all, oblivious to the darkness that hovered nearby. I wanted to shield her from it, to wrap her in my arms as I had when she was a child, to protect her from the knowledge that could one day devastate her. But how do you protect someone from a truth that grows like poison, hidden beneath the surface until it becomes impossible to ignore? I could not tell her, not here, not now, not while her life seemed so full of promise. And yet I knew that one day she would see it. One day the cracks would reveal themselves to her as they had to me. That thought tormented me more than the betrayal itself. The betrayal turned every memory I had with that person into something twisted. I thought of conversations we had shared, times they had looked me in the eyes and spoken with such warmth, and now I wondered if it had all been a mask. Had there been sincerity in anything they had ever done, or had every moment been part of a carefully crafted lie? The trust that once defined our relationship was gone, replaced by suspicion so heavy it drowned even the fondest of recollections. Trust, once broken, does not fade gently, it collapses, and it takes everything else with it. I stood in silence, my hands clasped tightly together, feeling my heartbeat pound in my chest. The betrayal was not just a personal attack, it was a public one, though no one else could see it yet. Here, in front of everyone, in a day meant to symbolize loyalty and unity, the truth had crept in, mocking the vows, mocking the celebration, mocking every promise of family and faithfulness. It was almost cruel in its timing, as though fate had chosen this day to peel back the curtain and reveal what had been hidden in the shadows all along. The realization settled over me like a heavy cloak. I thought about the years I had spent holding this family together, the sacrifices I had made, the trust one had poured into building a home where loyalty was meant to be unshakable. And now I could see that while I had been building, someone else had been tearing down, brick by brick, smile by smile, until there was nothing left but an illusion. That was what betrayal does. It does not only steal trust, it steals time, effort, and the very sense of who you are in relation to those around you. The hardest part was knowing I could not stop the betrayal from spreading. Even if I stayed silent for now, even if I preserved the fragile illusion for the sake of my daughter's happiness, the cracks were already there, and they would only grow wider with time. The trust had been broken, and nothing, not silence, not patience, not hope, could restore it to what it once was. I felt like I was standing on two different planes at once, the visible world of celebration and the invisible world of betrayal. On one side, music filled the air, glasses clinked, and joy radiated from every corner. On the other, silence pressed down like a weight, filled with secrets, lies, and the bitter knowledge that I was no longer standing on solid ground. Trust had been broken, and though no one else could see it yet, the effects of that shattering truth would ripple through everything that came after. The moment the truth settled inside me, it carried with it an unbearable heaviness, a question that refused to be silenced. Should I remain quiet and preserve the fragile illusion of happiness for my daughter, or should I confront the betrayal openly, letting the truth rip through the celebration like fire through dry wood? Every instinct inside me screamed for action, but another voice, quieter, steadier, begged for restraint. That inner conflict tore at me in ways no one else could see. To those around me, I was simply another guest, a mother glowing wit. I looked at my daughter as she twirled across the dance floor, her smile radiant, her laughter free. She had no idea that her perfect day was standing on the edge of being consumed by shadows. If I spoke now, if I let the words spill from my lips, I knew her joy would shatter instantly. The happiness that filled her heart would turn into confusion, anger, maybe even hatred. And how could I do that to her? How could I rob her of the one day she had dreamed of for so long, the day she had pictured in her mind since childhood? The thought pierced me with guilt, and yet, as much as I wanted to protect her, I also knew the poison of secrets had a way of seeping into lives, destroying slowly if left unchecked. I replayed scenarios in my mind, imagining what might happen if I confronted the betrayer in front of everyone. The wedding hall would fall into silence, gasps would ripple through the guests, faces would turn in shock, and the entire atmosphere would shift from joy to chaos. I imagined my daughter's tears, the confusion in her eyes as she tried to process what was happening, the whispers spreading through the crowd like wildfire. It would not only ruin her wedding day, but it might ruin her trust in me as well, because she would see me not as her protector, but as the one who shattered her moment of happiness. That thought alone was enough to hold me back, at least for the moment. But then I imagined the opposite, staying silent, pretending that nothing had been revealed. I could smile through the pain, let the day pass untouched, and preserve the memory she had always wanted. Yet I knew silence came with a cost. Silence meant living with the knowledge that betrayal had been allowed to flourish unchecked. Silence meant watching the betrayer continue to stand close, pretending, weaving themselves deeper into the fabric of our lives. Silence meant that I, too, would become complicit in the lie. The idea of protecting my daughter with silence began to feel like a betray. The weight of the decision pressed down harder with every passing minute. I walked through the room with a calm mask, but inside, every step felt like a countdown to something inevitable. I could feel my gaze locking onto the betrayer more often than I wanted, watching them laugh, talk, and mingle as though their hands were clean. Every smile they gave, every word they spoke, felt like another twist of the knife. The longer I remained silent, the more I wondered if I was allowing them to win, if I was giving them the power to dictate how much damage their secret could cause. I thought about the vows that had just been spoken, the promises of loyalty and honesty that were meant to symbolize the start of something pure. To watch betrayal sit in the shadows of that ceremony was unbearable. It mocked everything the day stood for, every word that had been spoken, every tear that had been shed in joy. I wanted to scream, to strip away the lies, to show everyone the truth. And yet I hesitated, because the truth had a way of burning more than just the guilty. It consumed everything around it, even the innocent. My mind returned to my daughter. Her happiness was fragile, like glass held between my hands. If I held it too tightly, it would shatter. If I let it slip, it would break just the same. I could not decide which was worse, letting her walk into her future blind to the betrayal that surrounded her, or tearing away her joy in a single blow by revealing what I had learned. Both choices carried consequences, and neither offered peace. I remembered moments from her childhood, times when she would come to me in tears, begging for the truth about things too painful for her young heart to understand. Back then, I had always promised her honesty, had always sworn that no matter how hard the truth might be, I would never hide it from her. That promise haunted me now. If I stayed silent, would I be breaking it? Would she one day look at me with the same disappointment I now felt toward the one who had betrayed us? The hall seemed to close in around me as the weight of the choice grew heavier. I thought of confronting the betrayer quietly, pulling them aside, demanding explanations away from the crowd. But even that possibility carried risks. What if they denied it, twisted the truth, painted me as the villain for daring to bring it up in such a sacred moment? What if their lies spread deeper, convincing others that I was imagining things, that grief or stress had clouded my judgment? The idea of standing alone, doubted and dismissed, terrified me as much as the betrayal itself. And so I stood between two paths, each one filled with pain. Confrontation promised chaos, silence promised corrosion. My heart ached with the knowledge that no matter what I chose, there would be no return to the innocence of the morning, no return to the simplicity of joy I had felt when the day first began. A choice had to be made, but the weight of it threatened to break me from the inside out. The guests laughed and clapped as the newlyweds cut the cake, cameras flashing, music swelling once again. To them, everything was perfect, untouched by the storm that brewed beneath the surface. To me, every cheer, every toast, every smile was a reminder of the secret I carried, of the decision I alone was left to make. My daughter's wedding was no longer just a celebration. It had become the stage upon which my silence or my voice would determine the course of everything that came after. The choice I faced weighed on me like an anchor, dragging me into deeper waters with every passing moment. The betrayal was not something that could be forgotten, not a fleeting mistake that time could wash away. It had carved itself into me, etching scars that would not heal with silence. The decision to confront or to stay quiet lingered in my chest, but beneath that conflict, something else began to stir, a strength I had not realized was still within me. Pain has a way of hollowing a person out, of leaving them feeling fragile and broken, but pain also has the power to sharpen, to carve away weakness until only resolve remains. As I stood among the guests, their joy a stark contrast to the storm inside me, I began to feel that resolve grow. The betrayal had wounded me, yes, but it had also awakened something long dormant. For too long, I had trusted blindly, given without question, believed in loyalty without demanding proof. That trust had been shattered, but in the ruins, I found clarity. I would no longer be silent, no longer allow others to dictate the truth of my life or the life of my daughter. I would rise, not out of vengeance alone, but out of a determination to reclaim the dignity and strength that betrayal had tried to strip away. Every stolen glance, every secret touch, every whisper that had confirmed the truth, they became fuel for the fire building inside me. I thought about the years I had sacrificed for this family, the countless ways I had poured myself into CRE. The path ahead would not be simple. I would need to be careful, to move with precision rather than impulse. To strike at the right moment meant watching, learning, waiting until the truth could no longer be denied or ignored. It meant gathering strength, both within myself and from the truth I now carried. The betrayer had chosen deception, but I would choose patience. When I finally revealed what I knew, when I finally acted, it would not just expose their betrayal, it would strip away every mask, every falsehood, until they were left with nothing but the weight of their own shame. I looked around the hall once more, letting the sounds and sights wash over me. The clinking of glasses, the cheers of guests, the joy of the dance floor, it all felt distant, like the surface of a world I no longer fully belonged to. But beneath that surface, I was building something stronger. Betrayal had tried to reduce me to silence, but instead, it had given me purpose. The woman who had once trusted too easily, who had given too freely, was gone. In her place stood someone who would not forgive, who would not forget, who would not allow betrayal to stand without consequence. The thought of confronting the betrayer directly no longer filled me with fear, it filled me with resolve. I would not rush, I would not stumble, I would not act in a way that weakened me. When the moment came, it would be deliberate, undeniable, and final. My daughter's happiness would not be sacrificed recklessly, but the truth would not remain buried forever. It would rise, just as I was rising, carved out of the very pain that had threatened to destroy me. The betrayal had taken so much already, but it would not take my strength. It would not take my dignity, and it would not take my resolve to seek justice. The fire that had been ignited inside me would not burn out. It would grow, it would spread, and when the time was right, it would consume everything that had been built on lies.